And we're live. Welcome, folks, to the American Movie Podcast. Today, we're going over a book, Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism. It is written by Anne Case and Angus Deaton. They're actually married, I just found out. If you don't want to read this book, it's a very bleak book, but you want to know a little bit more about it, there's a PBS. It's like 8 minutes. I watched a little bit of it. That's where I found out this couple was married. It's on YouTube, too, so it's PBS, and just Google Deaths of Despair. So what is Death of Despair? It is suicide rates have increased, accidental poisonings, which they contribute to either drug overdoses or alcohol-related overdoses or alcohol-related deaths, and then liver disease, which is people drinking themselves to death. And who is this affecting mostly? They saw a huge spike ever since 1995 from the ages of 35 to, I think, 55. The average life expectancy of non-Hispanic white Americans without a college degree doubled and tripled in some spots with those deaths of despair. So, here's a quote from it. So it's much of the decline stems from higher rates of suicide, opioid overdoses, alcohol-related illnesses, and they're drinking themselves to death, poisoning themselves with drugs, or shooting or hanging themselves. So it's like very, very bleak, and it starts off with a colorful story where it's like, okay, be ready. So where people's addiction it's overtaken their entire soul, and they see a lot of not only just addictive seeking behavior, but a lot of distrust and lying as well. So you see these people change. And so there was this colorful story of just this person who is addicted to alcohol on their deathbed, dying due to alcohol-related illnesses through a feeding tube, and they're putting alcohol into the feeding tube. So it's like, wow, okay. Incredibly sad. And then people hanging themselves, and then family members coming home to see it, and all of these things, and it's this despair. And what they contribute to it is a lack of not only connection. So they found out that within the top 10 states that have the proximity of per capita per state mile, I guess you'd say, that are the closest, the suicide rates are a lot lower. But in like Montana or places that have large swaths of people that are separated by the most mileage, the top 10 most spread out, I think 6 or 7 of those had the highest rates. So they think it has to do with some connection of proximity and well-being and interaction with people themselves. And so this makes somewhat sense, because one of the worst things you can do to a person is solitary confinement. They go crazy. So that makes sense. They also think it's a decline in or a lack of purchasing power. And they think that's due to wages staying the same, basically. And so when wages stay the same, everything gets a little bit more expensive. And so their purchasing power, they're getting the same amount of money, but they can't buy as much with it. And then a lot of people are not getting married as much. They're having children or not having children. And you're much less likely to be married and have a connection to a family if you do not have a college degree. And so their idea is that not everybody had a high school degree at one point, so we need to educate more people in that way. And we also need to make sure that jobs themselves are giving people dignity and helping people instead of just treating them as second-class citizens or things of that nature. So one of the things they didn't scratch their own itch. So they gave examples with the healthcare system, and they call it a cancer on society. And so, but they didn't really have an answer on how to curb it. They just kind of said, well, policymakers have to be more creative. And I can get behind that too, but there has to be some sort of answer as well. And so everything is very expensive. And I think if you just do a few things, so families, 1/3 of families don't go to get care because of the cost. So they just don't go. So let people know the cost. This is not in the book. So one of the scariest things is when you go there, you're like, how much is it going to cost? You have no idea because you're not the consumer. The insurance company is the consumer. So just alleviating. We are visual creatures and we move throughout the world visually in 3D space. So if you alleviate some of that, at least understanding but if you're walking through a dark room and you're already scared because you're seeking help with health, it's one of the scariest moments of all time, and you don't know how much things are going to cost, that is troublesome. So if you just alleviate some of that, I think if you just move that thing and open up, that opens up free market competition anyways. But so if you open that up, I think you'll lose a lot of the frightening characteristics of it, So back on track. So one of the things that they also talk about is, let me pull up. So this was actually insane. So they're in 2017, it's getting better. So they pointed out that a lot of this has to do with not only policymakers, but this division between labor, so people's work, and then capital themselves. So there's the lack of unions and the lack of unionized protection, which is important, but they don't think it's going to move back to any sort of having unions anyway. So they think that capital themselves and special interest groups have coordinated policy in order to enrich themselves, which, I mean, healthcare is it's $3 trillion or something like that. So it's one of the most lucrative areas that has a lot of waste. So that is one of their things, is that instead of trying to tax more people or tax the rich, try and figure out a way to alleviate the excess and then also stop the rent-seeking behavior of when people are capitalizing on the healthcare system and charging too much for drugs. And so they think that there should be something similar to the European NICE, where it protects citizens themselves and regulates some of the price structure just to stop this rent-seeking behavior. So that was one of them. And then, so a shocking number, 58 prescriptions per 100 Americans of opioids in 2017. That's insane. There are 58 per 100 Americans, 58 prescriptions of opioids per 100 Americans in 2017. That makes no sense to me. So that's insane. And also, this was a anonymous survey. It was 29 million Americans 12 years and older over misused drugs in the past month in 2016. That's insane too. That's like a lot of people. So one of the biggest things is like, you got to have some sort of connection. You want to make sure you can have some sort of community and some dignity within your work, and you want to have pride within your work. And so this division of unions and labor and capital, there's no autonomy within the structure of this. It's just a bureaucratic silo. And so what that means is that people don't get to make any sort of judgment call, or they don't even feel like they're a part of anything. Like it's rare, and they point this out in here. So the janitor is no longer invited to the CEO's Christmas party, and there's no structure in which that CEO was once a janitor anymore. So there's no hope without an education. And so this is one thing too, is that they didn't critique how much education costs anymore. So that was something that they totally should have done, because it's like in the last 10 years, it's increased 1,600% or something like that. So they didn't do any of that. Colleges are luxury brands now. And so they didn't critique that people need an education, but they can't afford it at this juncture because it's so expensive and it's so lucrative due to administrative bloat. So they didn't talk about that. And so that was one thing that they did not, that they should have rectified, I think. And so anyways, that there's no stepping stones or hierarchy in which you can climb anymore. And it's just, also with the board of directors of many companies, there's no employees on these boards anymore. So that is something that is unique to the United States, and something very unique to the United States as well as its healthcare system. And so they critique it, and they say that the healthcare system should be creatively remapped and some sort of slow progression into a better healthcare system. And they give a few examples at the very end where they could do it, But I think if you have a single payer system, or you have some sort of not socialistic program, but like universal healthcare, and you know the prices of things, if you just see the price, I think it'll help people. So that is one of the biggest things that I think. That it's just a small change as well. You just see the prices. Nowhere else you go, you can't see the prices of things. So that's not a free market system, and you don't get the benefits of competition and free market if you don't have that that answer of price, because people can't make just decisions or better decisions or communicate to other people, hey, this place did a great job and it was the exact same procedure and it cost this much and I love this doctor. You just can't do that because you don't know at the moment in time, and they can't make sound decisions. And it's like insurance companies, oh my God, it's crazy. So insurance companies, totally different thing, completely crazy. So bureaucratic, I guess you'd say. And so I did enjoy this book. It just did not finish out or flush out exactly their answer to the creative policy. They just laid out a few of the options, and that's okay. It's okay, but they didn't stick their flag in one of the ideas. So they just kind of open-ended this question of deaths of despair, and nothing to be bleak about, because some of it has came down, and there is justification within the opioid epidemic, where the Sackler family, who owns, this is all alleged, who owns Purdue Pharma, which they knowingly through emails said it was an addictive substance, and people have reported more pain. So this is basically concentrated heroin that they're divvying out and making billions of dollars per year upon, at the expense of people's, this is the rent-seeking behavior that they're talking about, at the expense of people's livelihoods, souls, families, and dignity. And just someone has back pain and then they're addicted to heroin after 12 days. It's like, oh God. No one tries to do that, but it's a doctor, and they were heavily marketed to these physicians. And now physicians are doing much better in alleviating the diagnosis of these, or prescription of these drugs. So that is something that they did point out. It's getting better, and there's legality or litigation throughout it too. So it's not all bad. It's just be very, very careful when it comes to opioids and alcohol addiction, and seek help and do all of those things, because it can grab you and then you lose you. So just be careful and make sure you have connections, or say hello. Like the ages are 35 to 55 right now, where these people, they just don't have any connection at all. So you need to be connected and just create some sort of community somehow. That's what you need to do, and just help. That's all you can do. So Deaths of Despair, if you want to know more about it, check it out. I listened to it on Audible. You can watch the PBS. Here, I'll pull up the PBS thing. I have it saved. So it's PBS Deaths of Despair Are Cutting Life Short for Some White Americans. So that's it. That was Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism. They went on to talk about the future of capitalism a little bit, but they just gave the options, and one thing that they did touch upon is the free market system and the enterprise that makes things great, or creates competition to make things great. And that there's a lot of lack of that. And I do think that they pointed out justifiably that the healthcare not only is hurting people's, because it's connected to employment, many things like that. So I encourage you to check it out if that's interesting to you. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you're reading or anything like that. Feel free to DM me on either Instagram or whatever. And if you follow me on Instagram, thank you. And you get to see, I don't know, pictures of me, whatever. So check that out if you want, or follow me on Twitter. And thank you so much. Matthew Benjamin with the American Movie Podcast. That was Deaths of Despair, written by Ann Case and Angus Deaton. Thank you so much. Until next time. Bye, 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 bye.